Some 2 minutes, and there's some students who rang me and said they must be here, so we'll give them the benefit of doubt for 1.5 minutes, and then we'll start. Yeah.
Off the wind on this heading live of Marquesas. You got 80 feet of a water line, nicely making way. In a noisy bar in Avalon, I tried to call you, but on a midnight watch I realized why twice you ran away. Think about how many times I have fallen. Spirits are using me, larger voices calling. What heaven brought you and me cannot be forgotten. I have been around the world, looking for that woman girl who knows love can endure, and you know it will. When you see the Southern Cross for the first time, you understand now why you came this way. 'Cause the truth you might be running from is so small, but it's as big as the promise of a coming day. So I'm sailing for tomorrow, my dreams of a dying, and my love is an anchor tied to you, tied with a silver chain. I have my ship, and all her flags are a-flying. She is all that I have left, and music is her name. Think about how many times I have fallen. Spirits are using me, larger voices calling. What heaven brought you and me cannot be forgotten. Around the world, I have been around the world, looking.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon. Two things have happened today which are usually not something that happens. The first one is that we're having music to bring us in for the public lecture. The second is that we have a commissioned officer at the back there to make sure that security is fine. So we recognize you and thank you for coming to attend this seminar. And it's beginning to worry that Elleke would belt out of here saying, "Where's Edward is not starting this thing, so can we do that?" So thank you very much, Elleke, for accepting to present this evening, and thank you also to Dr. Megan Jones, who is going to introduce Elleke to us. I would like to welcome all colleagues, friends, fellows. I can see quite a number of former fellows in presence, and colleagues that have supported STIAS over the years. Again, to thank all of you that attended the 25-year silver celebrations on Monday, and thank you for the support. For the individuals that are coming to STIAS for the first time, you're most welcome. My name is Edward, Professor Edward Chilumira. I'm the director STIAS. We will have this presentation within about 45 minutes to 1 hour to allow for Q&A. And my colleague, the Senior Program Manager, Dr. Christoph Poe, will handle the question and answer session. And after that, we will have a reception out there, and you're allowed to continue the question and answer session. Elleke can have her wine later. But before I call Megan to do the introduction, I would like to make some announcements. The first is that on the 27th of March, we'll have a discussion and launch of the latest STIAS book series titled Prospects for Regional Integration in Africa. And this was put together by STIAS Fellows, Andreas Freitag, who was here in 2019 when I'd just come, and also came back for 2022 as a team, as part of a team. And then Abena Oduro, who was a fellow in residence in 2022 as part of that project. And this is a book that is resulting from that team project. There will be in conversation with Ursula van Beek from the Stellenbosch University Department of Political Science. So you're welcome again for that book launch. The remaining 2 STIAS public lectures are still on course, and that is for 8th of April, Daniel Ailey, and then on the 15th of May, Alex Eze. So we hope that you'll be with us again, and probably even then we'll have some music. I'm not sure that we'll have a commissioned officer, but he can come back again. There's one thing that we don't usually do in the public lectures is to recognize the fellows that have just come or leaving, but because we don't have a seminar on Thursday, I'll take the opportunity to recognize them, to welcome Kepa Luis Mirazo from the University of Basque Country in Spain. He's right there. And also to welcome back Ismaila Emahi, who is from the University of Energy and Natural Resources in Ghana. So we have Spain and Ghana, and so we'll try and see whether we can forge something in that. But we also say goodbye to Paul Onanuga, and I think it is his last residency. Paul from, who is our Isolomso from Oyo Ekiti in Nigeria. So we're displacing one Nigerian and getting another Ghanaian. So we'll see how that works. So turning to this evening's public lecture, may I introduce Megan very briefly, and then I'll ask her to come and introduce Elleke. She teaches in the English Studies Department at Stellenbosch University, and she's the author of a number of works on South African literature and culture, including the monograph Refractive Realisms, Literature, Culture, and the South African Township. And I would really strongly recommend that people read that monograph. I'll not be responsible for the comments that come after that. But more recently, her interests have widened to include oceanic waste in the Global South. So Megan, please.
And thank you for inviting me to introduce Elleke. Elleke Boehmer is a very busy person who has been introduced many times and in many places, and probably via many iterations of the introduction to the speaker genre. My approach today will add to this corpus in a way that I hope is thoughtful and which will do justice to her considerable impact on the field of literary studies. Given her work's primary orientation towards post-colonialism and the Global South, I want to use the motifs of her current study, Southern Seas and Southern Skies, to think through her many achievements and future trajectories. Think of it as a map of Elleke. Born in Durban, a coastal city where, Chris Abani writes, in the moonlight, whales, or their ghosts, litter the sand, Elleke's work is deeply attuned to the ghosts and afterlives of empire. Her scholarship and fiction explore how these legacies are punctured by migration, resistance, and acts of reimagining. Like the sea, alongside which she was raised, her oeuvre is expansive and connective, stretching across history, crossing continents, and surfacing voices from the margins. As Nuruddin Farah reminds us, the sea is a border that never closes, a map that shifts with each tide. Elleke's scholarly and creative life embodies this open-endedness, mapping and reconfiguring the contours of empire through language, memory, and transformation. A scholar, a teacher, a novelist, an editor, and a critic, Elleke's work unfurls in many directions. Her scholarship continually asks us to interrogate how stories are told and by whom. Her lecture today, which interweaves indigenous Southern imaginaries and lateral Southern literatures with a close reading of J.M. Coetzee, offers us a reorientation that is both cosmic and specific. It is a project that, in its attentiveness to the natural world, promises something of the poetry of Bessie Head. The sky was full of light, and birds sang all over the place. Whether tracing the cultural legacies of colonialism or amplifying literatures of Southern connection, Elleke, like Bessie Head, asks us to be awake to seas and skies and land, and to scholarly and creative expression as forces of social and historical change. Her books, both fiction and non-fiction, grapple with the complexities of identity, from colonial and post-colonial literature to post-colonial poetics, from bloodlines to shouting in the dark. She examines the tensions between home and exile, silence and voice. If her present interests evoke the mutable qualities of sky and sea, then they're in conversation with her earlier work on what it means to belong to land and landscapes, and how such belongings crisscross the limits of place and nation. Following Eske Mplele, this land, our land, the one we dream in and suffer in, has a way of holding its people close. Elleke's focus, while ambitious and global, is, I think, anchored by her South African experiences and the necessity and complexity of engaging its suffering and its dreaming. As Professor of World Literature and English at the University of Oxford, she has guided generations of students, I think more than 40 PhDs, Elleke, helping them to dream and to suffer through the making of their own scholarly maps, enriching and diversifying our field. And so since Elleke is talking to J.M. Coetzee today, I want to end with a quote from Waiting for the Barbarians. Also, the air. The air is full of sighs and cries. These are never lost. If you listen carefully with a sympathetic ear, you can hear them echoing forever within the second sphere. This is what writing does, what literary scholarship does, and what Elleke's work exemplifies. She listens with a sympathetic ear, drawing out the wounding, the worlding, and the wonder of the literature she both creates and studies. And she is a very, very busy person. Please welcome Elleke Boehmer.
Gosh, Megan, thank you so much for an extraordinary, beautiful, and moving, a generous introduction, and I can't imagine a greater boon than to be put in resonance with Bessie Head. My word. Thank you so much. I'd like to say thanks also to everyone who's here, who's made the effort to come, in some cases from quite a distance. I'd like to thank the wonderful STIAS team led by Edward for making this extraordinary experience here possible. I would like to thank my wonderful hosts here in Stellenbosch, Vauri and Devot Botha, who have made my stay so very, very comfortable. And there's still a few weeks to go, so this is not valedictory. And I'd like to reach out to my fellows too. You will notice a few shout outs to you as we proceed. Southern imagining, how and why to see the world upside down. Now, I've foregrounded the how because the why is more obvious, the how is difficult. And I do have to say that in preparing this lecture in the last few weeks and days, what with everything that is going on in the North and in particular in the United States, I have on occasion thought to myself, you know, what is the point? Everything that I have to say here about Southern imagining, given the crisis that is unfolding in the United States, seems both inane and inept. And yet, on the other hand, I've also tried to reassure myself, perhaps we need Southern imagining now more than at any other time before. I have two invitations at the outset of this talk. One is to work with me, as in this talk I build transnational, translocal, transcontinental axes, the axes that underpin Southern imagining. It is an incredibly difficult part of this work. I have found it to be very difficult to think outside national categories of literary definition. Even to think regionally is hard, but I'm trying to think transcontinentally. Whether I pull it off, I'm not sure. I'm not sure yet, but I'm still working on it. It's a work in progress. So this is an invitation to work with me. And then the second, to make that challenge a little easier, is that I invite you with me to sink into the photographs, all of them taken by me unless otherwise indicated, to sink into the paintings, immerse yourself also in the poetry and the prose that I will read, and these remarkable works of art that we will look at together. To begin to create this immersive experience, we were led in by the Crosby, Stills and Nash 1985 hit Southern Cross. The refrain is worth repeating. If you see the Southern Cross when you see the Southern Cross for the first time, you know now why you came this way. So sink in, enjoy the ride. And the art forms that I'm going to share with you are incredibly important, because I think it is through immersing in these art forms that we can start to realize how the world can turn differently, that we become attuned to a counterclockwise spin, and that we develop a sense of the world as laterally connected. So there you see the Southern Cross. It's lying on its side, as it's currently doing in the night sky. Some of you will remember my showing it to you in Hermanus a couple of weekends ago. I'm going to begin with two readings. One is by Khabeba Badaroon, a Cape poet called Honclip, and you have copies interspersed so please share on the seats beside you. The other is from Richard Flanagan's Question 7, a memoir. I just would like to gloss Honclip a little for you. Honclip is Afrikaans for hanging rock. And as you'll see actually in the gloss to the poem, Honclip, hanging rock, on the far end of False Bay, was a place to which slaves at the Cape ran away. So we're going back there to the 1700s. For those of you who have been or who know from your own experience, who know False Bay, who know Strand or know Betty's Bay or all the beaches along False Bay, you will be able to think yourself into the map that this poem describes. It's a poem that plays with place names, and there's one other word that is helpful to know. It's an Afrikaans word, and the first line, bodem, is bottom, as in the floor of the sea. Right, let's read it together. I sink to the bodem, and the sea breathes me in, swallows me down its long blue throat. I follow the almost circle of the bay to Honclip, eye of a hook, past the black-purple shells of acricals clinging to rocks in Kogelbaai. Just beyond, the jagged reef, cormorants land with mournful caws and claws scraping on rock, their wings and sea cries folding into quiet. Now I am a sea snake weaving close to the shore through the pull and pulse of current, past the fishermen on Strandfontein casting their long lines into the deep, and past the empty shell of Monwabisi where children sink below the cruel waves, past the strand with no name opposite Khayelitsha, New Home, and past the curve of road to Makassar, naming the place across the ocean from which the slaves came. Past the meridian of Seal Island, I follow clipfish and sand sharks, shadows of pelicans and gulls falling through the sky of water, and dolphins in their thousands accompany me, and whales are islands near me, and ships sail over memories. Along the edge of the bay, the towns and rivers confess their bare names for infinity. Rivier zonder end, river opening on endlessness. Kleinmond, small mouth opening on endlessness, washing against them the endlessness of memory. Now I am one of the dead. I pull myself to hung clip on a cord of names. I hear them sing in the throat of the sea, the long blue throat of the sea. Now there's so much to say about this extraordinary poem, but one thing that I would just like you to hold in your mind as we go is the sky of water. And for those who are really observant on the trip to Cape Agulhas the other weekend, you may have noticed a road sign to Kleinmond as we were driving along. Right, my second reading is from Richard Flanagan's Question 7, absolutely extraordinary memoir, from page 63. Many years later, when I went to England, I studied history. An idea of time formed over 3,000 years of human experience in Europe, which I discovered made perfect sense of European time, stopping at all stations of European progress and European thought. It was a straight railway line that perfectly mirrored an experience that became an idea, and an idea that became experience, and an experience that became European thought, and then the European novel. But it made no sense of Tasmania. In Tasmania, history did not hold and reality was otherwise. History constantly failed, history constantly recurred, not as answers or comfort, not as a story of progress, but as a massacre site, a napalmed logging clearfell, convict words that spoke of what couldn't be spoken, mythical beings long dead that kept returning, haunting, asking of me something I have spent a life trying and failing to answer. It was the issue of a genocide and a slave society, and nothing ever quite went forward, and everything finally returned, as I was too also. There was no straight line of history. There was only a circle. Everything finally was as the ancient petroglyphs depicted it, a circle within circles, the island's great idea of time, formulated over 40,000 years of human experience. Now, to give you a little roadmap after those readings, those were my epigraphs. The talk is divided into 4 sections. It's always helpful to know that we have these milestones to aim for. So, beginning now, opening with the first section. And actually, I've made a bit of a mistake because I meant for you to see this while we were hearing the Khabeba. While we were hearing the Khabeba Badaroon poem. This is an absolutely remarkable painting, one of 2 that I have used as my mandalas throughout this Southern Imagining work. It's by Lola Frost, as you can see, and it's painted from the south back up to the north. And I'm absolutely delighted, transported actually, that Lola is here in the audience today. It's so great. And this is a painting, the other mandala that I've used. This is by Indigenous Australian artist Nyanmiti Burton, Kung Karankalpa, or the Seven Sisters there being the Pleiades, a constellation very low in the northern sky from the southern hemisphere, marking the end of autumn and the beginning of winter. The South, then. For the purposes of this talk and in my work, by South, I mean the lands and islands of the far south of the world, facing the Southern Ocean. The definition overlaps in part with, but is distinct from, the global South. I use the South, then, throughout this work as a geo-epistemic concept, and to accompany that idea, I have this painting, a landscape painting by Angelina George, near Ruin City, 2007. She's a Western Australian Indigenous artist. Now, with this image still in front of us, I'd like to give my topic in cameo so that we know where we are going, because parts of what I'm going to suggest to you and share with you, I think, are counterintuitive, certainly will be counterintuitive to many who are not perhaps as familiar with the Southern Cross as some of us are. In that South that I have just designated, different conceptual approaches, I suggest, are required. Why is this? They're required because the spin of the Earth and the inclination of the sun are different in the Southern Hemisphere. But not only that, though these are important realities to take into account, as we'll see again. More importantly, though, temporality and a sense of history are put together differently in these ancient and, relatively speaking, not often visited parts of the world, what Richard Flanagan calls the scrag ends of the planet. To think of these end-of-the-world spaces, to live within them, as many of course do, and to write about the lives lived within them, demands that we try to think outside the frameworks of the North and the West, that we think outside Western timelines and outside the gridded spaces on the map that are always referred back to a northern metropolitan center. In other words, that we to think of end-of-the-world spaces means that we think more of the world as a whole, and that's my objective here, to think imagistically, conceptually of the world as a whole. But how do we do this? This is the million-dollar question, the million-rand question. How do we do this when the institutions of knowledge that we have all been trained in, the traditions of learning that we hold, and the systems of understanding are all oriented north? And I respond, and the rest of this talk unfolds this, by looking south and by reading south. So some starter concepts, and that is of Wellington, New Zealand, looking south. Some starter concepts. Yes, okay. I was expecting a slightly different order, sorry. So the literary, first and foremost. I suggest that it is generative to consider the world from its southern edges, especially through the cosmologies of indigenous people, and that this can provide a lens for a more holistic planetary understanding, those petroglyphs that Richard Flanagan was referring to. As well as myths and myth systems, literary writing offers another of these time-embedded ways of thinking south. So I take literature and the literary imagination as form-giving, as shaping our understanding, as fundamental. Poetry, fiction, memoir, and travel writing give us maps, then, for southern imagining. And I weave together two ideas that I've been working on, as Megan was already suggesting, for a long time. The idea of lateral exchanges that I explored quite a long time ago now in the book you see there on the left, and the idea of shaping identities through cross-border dialogue, the absolute importance of cross-border, cross-cultural, intercultural dialogue. So thinking south then means not actually, kind of contravening my title, not actually the world upside down, because that is of course a northern definition, but rather as thought otherwise, through southern conceptual frames. And I'm going to keep coming back to this idea of here-ness, southern hesity. It's a Greek word meaning here-ness, right? For the majority of the world's people, given that, as I'll say again in a moment, about 89% of the world's population, human population, lives in the northern hemisphere. For most of the world, the southern hemisphere is there. It's over there. It's far. I'm going to try to kind of conjure with you an idea of here-ness, of presentness, here in this space. I looked it up this morning, 33 degrees south. And interestingly, just as a kind of sidebar, that coordinate was given to me as a minus, right? The northern latitudes are all plus. The southern latitudes are minus. So it was given as minus 33 degrees. So developing that idea of here-ness, moving into the second section, I would like to take you through some evocations. And you have a south cloud, a southern cloud to focus your minds. The south is the far, the underside and the upside down. It is widdershins and topsy-turvy, counterclockwise, contrariwise, about face, antipodal, or the wrong way around, against the sun. It is the bottom of our planet. It's verso, and yet not. It depends on where you are looking from, here or there. To the north, the south of the world is contrary. The southern skies are upside down. For those of you who know your Orion, he stands on his head in the southern hemisphere. But to southerners, the south is plainly here and the right way up. It is itself in its place. For centuries, the limits of the known world lay south, at least for Europe and probably also for most of Asia. Beyond, as in Strabo or Ptolemy's descriptions, was empty space, the ultimate ne plus ultra, no going beyond. These Greek geographers of the ancient world speculated that vast southern continents lay far south as counterweights to the northern land masses. Their Renaissance successors charted the south as a chimera, an amalgamated elsewhere, this be monsters. Setting out to discover more, early European explorers found that these places were contrary also in their fluidity, their sheer wateriness. Large land masses far south were in actuality few and far between, while oceans were immense, turbulent and freezing. To their eyes, everything was the wrong way about. South of the Tropic of Capricorn, the sun traces an east-west trajectory through the sky, unlike its left-right motion when seen from the northern hemisphere. Sun-cast shadows turn anti-clockwise. Water spirals rotate left-hand-wise, driven like migrating birds by the Earth's different spin. Solar eclipses move in the opposite direction, and the seasons are all the wrong way around, with snow in June, or at least cold in June, and spring blossom in October. Ferdinand Magellan, Abel Tasman, Francis Drake, James Cook, Louis-Antoine de Bougainville, Yves de Kerguelen, and many, many others, the names of these northern explorers now cover the southern lands they mapped, as if to erase their strangeness. As late as the 1920s, D.H. Lawrence, on a visit to New South Wales in Australia, felt terror at the clefts in the atmosphere that he noticed. Later again, the science fiction writer Ursula Le Guin described the great southern ice as the left hand of darkness. But what is clefted or left hand to whom? Again, this is really important because it's so difficult to do this southern imagining. Northern perspectives are institutionally embedded. While the southern hemisphere makes up one half of the Earth's surface, southern geographies, histories, and lives tend to be defined from northern vantage points in northern languages and northern number systems. Remember that minus again, minus 33 degrees south. All of the major world languages, by which I mean the dominant world languages, Mandarin, Bengali, English, Spanish, French, have northern roots. The shelves of most Northern Hemisphere libraries hold books written on northern subjects by northern writers, yet with this orientation invisible to most. Notions of a counterclockwise world remain in the realm of fantasy and oddity for most of the world's readers. Perhaps this makes empirical sense. As I said, only 10% of the world's people live in the southern hemisphere. 81% of its surface area is ocean. Think about that. The North's geolinguistic bias is reflected in the many cliched phrases like down under or far side of the world that are used to denote southern hemisphere countries. In recorded history, the lands of the South have always been perceived as the outside of our planet. Spaces too far away, too scattered, too insignificant, to matter fully to the world as a whole. And just as an illustration of that, just think of the pages of any daily newspaper, whether online or paper, whatever is your preference. The emphasis is always to the north. If something is foregrounded that happens in the southern hemisphere, and that includes the relatively developed society of Australia, it has to do with a disaster. It has to do with a weather event. Politics, the developments in politics and economics are northern, and that is where the focus is in newspapers. And yet, to those of us who live here or who sit here now, contrariwise, the South is close and immediate. It is this space we are in now. It is here. It is where we may feel at once on the edge, looking at the newspapers, and yet here, both on a boundary and yet unbounded, mindful of our coordinates, aware of the special thisness or haesity of our worlds. So southern haesity then insists that the southern here is sufficient to itself, and that by claiming here-ness, we begin also to claim a specific sense of southern belonging to this whole planet, both the north as well as the south. And just to give you an evocation of here-ness, accompanied by Yachiki Vicky Cullinan's extraordinary canvas. It's very, very large, this canvas, Munga Ilkari, or Night Sky. One aspect of thisness are, in fact, the starry skies of the southern hemisphere. It is empirically the case that the night skies in the southern hemisphere are more full of stars. There are more stars in the southern hemisphere. From the southern hemisphere, you see the entire arc of the Milky Way. We'll come back to that in a moment. You also see from here the Magellanic Clouds, named after Magellan, who first observed and described them for the north. Why is this? Because the Earth is at the outer edge of our galaxy, the Milky Way, but the South Pole points into the Milky Way, whereas the North Pole points out. So we see the entire array of the Milky Way from the southern hemisphere, and northern is only half. So now some more difficulty. Approaches and projections. How do we grapple with thinking south, conceiving southern here-ness, where those dominant traditions of thought and theorizing are all from the North, taking the North as the default. Where do we turn for models, for guidelines for thinking South? Well, one place we might go is theory from the South. For example, Paul Carter, Raywin Connell, John and Jean Komarov. But even this important decolonial work does not always question, and actually I have brought in this Stellenbosch University edition, I have brought Theory from the South, but then the subtitle is a clanger, How Euro-America is Evolving Towards Africa. Emphasis is still on Euro-America. So even important decolonial work does not always question the underlying conceptual patterns in world history or global sociology that keep in place already normative northern vantage points. The unvarying emphasis on binary north-south axes usually takes for granted the methodological predominance of the North. An influential case in point is Theory from the South, the Komarovs. While the work productively defines the global South as inherently slippery, inchoate, and unfixed, it nonetheless sees, and this is a real problem in sociologies of the global South, it nonetheless sees modernity as singular, and hence paradoxically as emanating from a still predominant, technologically superior Euro-America. As also in world systems theory, think Immanuel Wallerstein, this concentrically arranged one but uneven world is conditioned to marginalize Southern perspectives. So other models we might look to, very helpful in my work has been the oceanic and environmental work of someone like the Hawaiian Epeli Hau'ofa, We Are the Ocean. Also indigenous cosmologies, Jeanine Lean and Alexis Wright, both indigenous Australians, and then the Maori Linda Tuihai Smith. I'll come back to that in a moment, that's why it's highlighted. Indian Ocean worlds thinking has been very, very helpful, especially the work of Isabel Hofmeyr, Meg Samuelson, Tina Steiner, who's here, Sean Lavery, and others. Extraordinary work, which in a way I'm trying to push out also to embrace the Southern Ocean. And then very helpful to me has been the linguistic theory of Sapir-Whorf, although modified. I don't take as hardline a linguistic deterministic position. And Deirdre Wilson and Dan Sperber's inferential reading or relevance theory, which takes literary writing and the shaping effect of literary writing on the imagination very seriously. I'd also just like to refer you to, because what I'm trying to do here obviously is to kind of readjust your sense of here-ness. And here's a wonderful projection, actually by a Cape Town, born in Cape Town geographer, and his career mostly played itself out in the United States. Athelstan Spilhouse, an Earth projection centered on the oceans with Antarctica at the very heart. It kind of corresponds, it talks back to the image with which I began, which centered the South Pole. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm exploring three pathways, three approaches, one through words and word concepts, another through mythography, myth systems, and the third through literary writing, where I'll spend most of the second half of this talk. So the linguists Sapir and Whorf argue that our understanding of the world is shaped by the words we have to name it. Now that's controversial, it's arguable, and we could debate about it with more time. But I'd like to build on that by continuing, by proposing that rethinking the South using Southern words and concept metaphors offers a way of expressing and reawakening Southern knowledge, which has been partly obliterated by the going to sleep of hundreds of indigenous Southern languages. Khoi Khoi, for example. Words, chants, songs, and stories in these languages articulate perceptions, sensations, and understandings that are woven in with Southern spaces, their cycles and seasons, their contours and currents. They offer a way of seeing the South from the South, of bringing Southern experiences and life fragments disruptively into the Northern languages that now largely represent Southern spaces. So for the purposes of orienting South, words for Southern entities, actions, and artifacts can let us into the experience of being in place in Southern lands, even if only fleetingly, to capture a here-ness. As a subsidiary project to my main project, I did some fantastically interesting to me work with lexicographers on the Oxford English Dictionary, kind of extract, which they're able to do with these amazing technologies they have, extracting indigenous Southern words, highlighting them in the OED. I mean, most obviously, come back to it in a moment, most obviously words like boomerang and kangaroo, but also actually a surprising number of other words. So I propose there that language that is shaped by the context to which it refers in turn shapes our understanding of that context. And because a dominant motif throughout is mapping and how we read the world through these Southern words and myths and stories, I have there a Polynesian and Marshall Islands sailing map. It dates from the mid-19th century. It's made of sticks and of shells, and it was used to navigate relative to the position of the stars in the sky, the reflection of the stars in the ocean, and the movement of the tides, and by day, the movement of birds in the sky. So just to give one example, and Harold, if you're here, you will notice, thank you very much for taking the picture of this extraordinary hoja that I noticed on the Cape Agulhas trip. So hoja, or hoho, an Afrikaans word from Khoi Khoi, which has entered South African English. It appears in the Dictionary of South African English. It's a collective term for creeping and slithering creatures. For insects, yes, we have that word in English, but also it's a collective noun also for snakes, small snakes, lizards, spiders, scorpions. Hoja, and it also captures something of that feeling of crawliness, slitheriness that we feel when we see one of these creatures. Moving now to myth, a quotation from Alexis Wright, who will come back. Joseph Midnight, a character in her extraordinary novel Carpentaria, reminding us that it's the same dreaming world as I live in, and before that, no such thing as a contemporary world. And this was probably this image, which is of the full array of the Milky Way seen on a night without light pollution and with a good telescope. This is the full array of the Milky Way, such as one sees it from the southern hemisphere. And it marks, my inclusion of this marks a particular, a kind of revelation that I had while working on this project, or of trying to get ways of conceiving and thinking about Southern imagining. And that was that it was already known to me that Indigenous Australian peoples had the myth of the emu in the sky. If you see that there's a dark shape, as it were, in the Milky Way, which you can imagine is of an ostrich running or an emu running, right? And the Milky Way is at this position in the sky in May, which is mating season for emus. So the Indigenous Australian, different peoples right across the Australian continent know that when the Milky Way is at this position, it is, this is when emus mate. And then in July, the Milky Way goes back to a kind of vertical position, a sitting position, which is when the emus are laying their eggs. Now, to my excitement, Khoikhoi peoples also had such a myth, talking, of course, about the ostrich, which is native to these parts. And then the Makovi people, now of southern Brazil, had a similar story to mark the seasons with reference to the behavior of the rhea. So partly because, I mean, don't get me started, and this is the long grass of this project, but because of the breaking up of Gondwana land, there are these similar, which is the great ancient continent that produced South America, Africa, Australia, and Antarctica. When it broke up, there are similar birds on those, as it were, southern appendages of those continents. Penguins are another flightless bird. But to extricate myself from that long grass, I would like to go on to my third part, orientations south through reading south, through literary reading. I have 5 brief examples. It is no accident that 4 out of 5 are women writers. It is an accident that I woke up to a few days ago that 3 out of the 4 are New Zealand writers. But that's probably not actually an accident, thinking about it again, because 2 of the 3 are South Islanders. And if you remember that map right at the beginning, New Zealand stretches very, very far south into the Southern Ocean. The kind of the end of South Island of New Zealand is about, well, we'll see this in a moment, is about 48 degrees south. Here we have Zoe Wickham. For my fellows who don't know her work, I strongly recommend it. She's a Cape Town writer who now divides her time between South Africa and Scotland, Glasgow, where she lives. Zoe Wickham here offers us a very neat southern compass. In the absence of a pole star, there's no North Star in the southern skies. What do we do? How do we orient south? Well, she explains in this extract from the short story, A Trip to the Gifberge, from You Can't Get Lost in Cape Town. Interesting that there's obviously an orientation going on there, even in the title. I watch the stars in an ink blue sky. The Milky Way is smudged white on the dark canvas. The 3 kings flicker, but the Southern Cross drills 4 points into the night. I find the long axis and extend it 2.5 times, then drop a perpendicular down onto the tip of the Gifberge, due south. And now another kind of spinning the world laterally, as with those rheas and emus and ostriches, spinning the world laterally and going to the New Zealand poet Bill Manhire's Zoetropes. I have the whole poem here, and I'm going to read it. It's quite short. It's a broken sonnet, but you have the key lines there. Zoetrope, for those of you who don't know, it's kind of a spinning device. You can make it with paper. It's a spinning device with cutouts, so that when you spin, you kind of glue the paper into a circle, and when you spin it, you can see a kind of an early form of cinematography. So, zoetropes. So there's a spin in this poem. It begins in London. A starting. Words which begin with Z alarm the heart. The eye cuts down at once, then drifts across the page to other disappointments. Zanana, the women's apartments in Indian or Persian houses. 0 is naught, nothing, nil, equator, the quiet starting point of any scale of measurement. The land itself is only smoke at anchor, drifting above Antarctica's white flower, tied by a thin red line, 5,000 miles to Valparaiso. Valparaiso in Chile. So you see how in that short poem, just 14 lines, the entire planet is spun. And now to Catherine Mansfield. Something remarkable goes on in this passage too, which at first is not visible to the naked eye. I've highlighted it for you. It's important to know, just before I read this passage, it's important to know that the aloe is not native to New Zealand, that it appears in this New Zealand garden, and that, as you'll see in a moment, it appears as a great, monstrous, towering thing, a sort of mythical presence. It's not innate, it's not indigenous, it's not natural, and there it is. So in this passage, Mansfield, New Zealand writer, worked between New Zealand and London. She is also drawing a lateral south-south connection, much as did the rhea, emu, and ostrich myths. So imagine a daughter, Kezia, and mother, Linda, in the garden. They've just moved house. "Mother, what is it?" asked Kezia. Linda looked up at the fat, swelling plant with its cruel leaves and fleshy stem, high above them as though becalmed in the air, and yet holding so fast to the earth it grew from. It might have had claws instead of roots. The curving leaves seemed to be hiding something, the blind stem cut into the air as if no wind could ever shake it. "That is an aloe, Kezia," said her mother. "Does it have any flowers?" "Yes, Kezia," said Linda, smiled down at her, and half shut her eyes, "once every 100 years. And finally, penultimate in my array of short examples, Janet Frame, introducing something of a lighter note. Janet Frame, the New Zealand writer, autobiographer. I'll just plunge us in. This is from Owls Do Cry, her first novel. Their town, called Waimaru, was small as the world and halfway between the South Pole and the equator. That is, 45 degrees exactly. There was a stone monument just north of the town to mark the spot in gold lettering. "Traveller," the writing said, "stop here. You are now standing halfway between the South Pole and the equator." What did it feel like to be standing at 45 degrees? It felt no different. Okay, that is a bit of a byline to my what is here-ness. It actually feels no different, and yet it is important to imagine it and to think about it and to think about its difference, its possible difference. Now, you won't get many signs like this in northern hemisphere places, marking the southness of a place. And here is the Southern Ocean towards Antarctica, from St. Clair, South Island. This is where Janet Frame spent her final years. And back to Alexis Wright, who I already quoted from, her immense novel, Carpentaria, a great 500-pager that I recommend to you all. This is about one of the chief characters, who's called Norm Phantom, who is a fisherman and who is able to navigate using the reflection of the stars in the ocean. When he talked about the stars, they said he knew as much about the sky as he did about water. The mob said he had always chased the constellations. We watched him as a little boy, running off into the night, trying to catch stars. They thought he must go right up to the stars in the company of groper fish when it stormed at sea, when the sea and the sky became one, because otherwise, how could he have come back? Right? Remember Gabeba Badaroon's The Sky of Water. And now to my more detailed case study, Keeping South, James Coetzee, Connection and Conversations. In my view, as I hope to show in brief in a moment, James Coetzee, as a novelist, much more a novelist than an essayist for my purposes, is a major writer-thinker of the South, of Southern imagining, and I have been very indebted to his work in getting to my into some of the postulates that I have put before you. Coetzee's concepts of the South represents a long accumulation of his thinking. It is something he has started to articulate in recent time. By recent, I mean the last 15 years or so. Articulate in so many words, but, and this is what I hope to show in the next few slides, the constituents of his Southern thinking, his concept of the South, have been present really from the beginning of his work. And so what I'd like to do is to sift and back project core ideas from the earlier work into his refreshed consideration of the South. His work on the South comes out of, I think, various movements in his own life. As many of you know, he emigrated from South Africa to Australia, to South Australia, from South Africa to South Australia in 2002. And he has also, in the 2010s, forged a series of collaborations, and here's where, importantly, South America comes into the mix. He's also forged a series of collaborations with writers, publishers, and translators, in particular in Buenos Aires, to a lesser extent, Chile. This has involved translating between the different literatures of the South and trying to circumvent thereby the publishing behemoths of the Northern Hemisphere, such as, for example, Penguin Random House. Ultimately, the South, for Coetzee, perhaps also for me, I'm not sure yet, the South is unget-atable, and yet writing and reading get us some way towards it. Here is Coetzee on the South, as I said, very coded. It is a unique world. There is only one South, with its unique skies and its unique heavenly constellations. In this South, the winds blow in a certain way, and the leaves fall in a certain way, and the sun beats down in a certain way that is instantly recognizable from one part of the South to another. Now, the constituents of that Southern thinking that have been developed across Coetzee's work from the 1970s group, I think, I propose under these four headings: the provincial and the minor, linguistic determinism, his idea of language speaking through us, of life writing, of writing us, writing our lives, and of pathways across the South, lateral South-South connection that I already mentioned. I'd just like to, quite swiftly, given time, move through them. The provincial and the minor. Coetzee has always, sometimes controversially, spoken of himself as coming from the provinces, the edge of the world, from a minor country, and his family. He writes in English, but his family is speaking a minor language, namely Afrikaans. His autobiographical trilogy, Scenes from Provincial Life, captures that idea of the provinces and the edge in the title, in the collective title. And here, I mean, I could have selected many examples, just a few. Though I had intermittently taught courses in grammar and stylistics in Cape Town by 1979, I had lost touch with new developments. He writes that he needed to go back to Texas, where he had studied, to get up to speed with those new developments. And again, further back in time, around 68, I'd left South Africa to be part of a wider world. I'll just sort of leave these to sit with you. Linguistic determinism, language, writing, and thinking us. A truly extraordinary essay of Coetzee's that's not often discussed, talked about, is his essay on Newton, the physicist Isaac Newton, and how in the Principia, where he develops a theory of gravity, he suppresses the active voice. So the voice that implies an agent, I kick the ball. He suppresses the active voice to get rid of the idea of God and to try to conceive of gravity. as an agentless force. Extraordinary, but it's an illustration of how language thinks us. So the more reason to listen into the languages of the South. And as further illustrations from his novel Disgrace, he would not mind hearing Petrus's story one day, but preferably not reduced to English. More and more he is convinced that English is an unfit medium for the truth of South Africa. With each passing day, several languages of the world disappear, repudiated, choked out. One of the symptoms of this plague was from the beginning what we call European literature, and literature has gained ground by denying voice. And I would insert there Southern voice, Southern voices. Third cluster of ideas, the enterprise of self-construction, thinking with literature through life writing. This is a very famous quote of Coetzee's, but it really gains power in the context, or has gained power for me in the context of this work of thinking with literature, thinking South, orienting South, using literary writing. Writing reveals to you what you wanted to say in the first place. In fact, it sometimes constructs what you want or wanted to say. Writing writes us. Writing shows or creates what our desire was a moment ago. And then, in the interest of time, I'll just sort of let you soak those two up as you look at them. By automatized speech, he means the kind of the speech, the formulaic speech of ordinary conversation, how it speaks its speaker. And then the fourth and final cluster, pathways across the South, South-South lateral connection. And, you know, it has been to put on the lenses of Southern imagining and to read back through Coetzee's work brings out all these moments where he's been signaling South-South lateral connection, the kind of connection that he has been embodying now in his translation work and his collaborations with South America and with Australian writers, including Alexis Wright. But these moments have been there from the beginning. From Foe, Friday's silence is at the very close of the novel, washes the cliffs and shores of the island, running northward and southward to the ends of the earth. And this is Elizabeth Costello, the eponymous, the titular character in that novel, in the section, in the chapter, the novel in Africa. She's contemplating going on a cruise, on which she'll give lectures. She would not mind doing it again, going to sea. She would like to see Easter Island and St. Helena, where Napoleon languished. She would like to visit Antarctica, not just to see those vast horizons, that barren waste of ice, but to set foot on the seventh and last continent, know what it is to be a living creature in a land of inhuman cold. And as a great admirer of Samuel Taylor Coleridge's wonderful Southern poem, Rime of the Ancient Mariner, they are actually, for me, echoes of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner in barren waste of ice and land of inhuman cold. So it's a very literary evocation of Antarctica, but it orients us in that novel, it orients us to the South Pole. So the South, I would venture to say, for Coetzee at least, is unrepresentable. And here we might replace history and reality for South in these final quotes. History may be a process for representation, but to me it feels more like a force for representation. So the South may be a process for representation, but to me it feels more like a force for representation. The task becomes to imagine the unimaginable. The South is that reality that lies beyond our imagination, the outside of the world, yet which we must bear in mind at our every turn. And here is my close. This is from Patagonia, looking out to the Southern Ocean. The writing there says, "My sky, why do the clouds follow us?" How do we bridge north-south distances in the mind, in our sympathetic understanding? I answer that question, I have answered that question in this lecture, with language, with myth, and with the literary imagination. This imaginative bridging, these south-south and north-south solidarities are, I suggest, we're coming to the why now, I've left it to the very end. Why to imagine the world upside down. This imaginative bridging, these south-south and north-south solidarities are now perhaps more important than at any other time in human history. Just to take one example, the Southern Ocean is warming faster than any other ocean, any place on Earth. Antarctica contains 90% of the world's frozen water. Go figure if the ocean that washes the shores of Antarctica is warming faster than any other place on Earth. Just this weekend, I was reading about the famous penguins of Simonstown, of Windmill Beach. Their population is reducing by 8% per year. Again, go figure. Where will they be in 10 years' time? Why that is, and it's the same actually for the penguins of South Island, New Zealand, why that is because the colder water in which their food lives is further away, so they need to swim further to get their food because the ocean is warming. So it is time to pay attention to these southern spaces, so ignorable for so many in the world. The imaginative bridges that I have traced, I hope, help us to think about the hemispheres and the planet's vastness in the round. They try to build identification, and they show us that even events that seem very far away, like the melting ice caps, are, in terms of their impact on everyone, north and south, incredibly and urgently close by. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that beautiful, well, journey, I should say. It's skirting the shores of these southern oceans, peering up into the sky. That was remarkable. And these, I think, important, chilling is perhaps not the right term, conclusions around the warming of the seas here. And then this contrast, which I found striking, that on the one hand, the South as unget-atable, yet when you find yourself here, it feels no different. So that was remarkable. We have an audience in the room here, which is wonderful. Welcome everyone again. We also have an online audience. Thank you all of you for joining us online as well. For the sake of the questions and answers, we'll take questions from the room here, not from the online audience, but those online, please do feel free to put any of your comments, questions and so on onto the chat. We'll save that and we'll make sure that Elleke gets those as well to reflect and ponder afterwards, and maybe get back to you if that's appropriate. So we have about 20 minutes, I think, for questions, so good time for a couple of inputs.
It always takes a moment.
Just to say thank you, and as a Spaniard, I cannot refrain from saying something about this last, before the picture goes.
Oh, yes, please.
When you say my sky in Spanish,
yeah.
my cielo, is also my love, my dearest. So it's a double, it's a game, it's a kind of a game of words that is very, just for you to, next time you show. It's beautiful because it's also love there. It's also love there, yes. And it's not just speaking to the sky, but also to the lover. Why are clouds following us as a couple as well?
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Kepa. I saw Helen.
Thank you, Elleke. That was beautiful. Also slightly giddy and dizzy-making. I'm sure you must be drowning in literary material, but as you have been compiling this extraordinary recreation and reorientation. But do you include Thomas Hardy's Drummer Hodge?
I throw yes, you got it? Okay, I know it off by heart, actually. Yeah.
Can I indulge me? I'm just going to read the last stanza. Yet portion of that unknown plain will Hodge forever be. His homely northern breast and brain grow to some southern tree, and strange-eyed constellations reign his stars eternally.
Thank you, Helen. Yes. Thomas Hardy figures quite prominently. He and Samuel Taylor Coleridge are the only two northern-born, as in north of the equator, writers that come into this work. But for that reason, he got it. And don't get me started on Hardy. The reason why he got it is that he read, because he was an autodidact, he read astronomical texts. And he was fascinated by the work of Herschel, who, of course, had his observatory here in Cape Town, and he read extensively in Herschel's work. So that's where he got that image from. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen. I see Dani over here.
Thank you very much for a beautiful lecture. I just wondered a little bit about the voices that you displayed to us. Many of them are people with lots of connections to the north, so sort of northern people imagining the south. So is there something missing there in this whole picture?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really important question. There were a number of rhetorical moves in my talk, because which must have been apparent, what I wanted to do was to shift us with the images, with the readings, to take us south. But it is an interconnected planet. I'm not hypostatizing the south, I hope, and I'm certainly aware that, because of those global forces that we all know about, the North does remain dominant. We're addressing each other here in the language English, which is a global language of Northern provenance. And many of these writers, to make their careers, had to go north and work north. That's how they sustained themselves. That's how they built a reading public. This is one of the reasons why I find Coetzee's project, working with South America, so compelling, so inspiring, because he's trying to circumvent, with his great stature, his Nobel Prize, his 2 Booker Prizes, and his myriad other prizes, acclaim, and connections. What he is trying to do is to orient, God help him, how many, just 200 years and more, if not never. But what he's trying to do is to shift those colossi. Shishua had a question, I think.
Mr. Hand there? Shishua and then Anne.
Thank you so much, Elleke. It was brilliant. In a sense, my question has been touched upon by the previous speaker. I wanted to ask whether the South has their language. That is very crucial, I think, to your conclusion. Language definitely helps in bridging the divide. But what is that language? Are there literary texts that have been written in languages that don't emerge from the North, that you think can help us in bridging that divide? Thank
you. No, and actually, to answer your question, I need to use a word that was implicit in so much of what I was talking about, the difference in power between North and South has so much to do with colonialism. I mentioned Captain Cook and Magellan and so on setting out from, the various northern capitals that they set out from. They were the beginnings, of course, of these processes of colonialism, of enslavement, as mentioned by both Flanagan and Badarun right at the beginning, of exclusion and marginalization and indeed genocide. And what that, linguistically, one of the impacts of that was the decimation of many, many indigenous languages. Coetzee refers to it in that quote. There, with each passing day, several languages of the world disappear. So there isn't in Khoikhoi or Yaghan or Gamilaroi, there aren't the dictionaries, there aren't the infrastructures that are needed for any literature to grow. So that is a problem. And that is why I was implying, it was such a kind of Cook's tour of a talk, but that's why, as I hope I implied, and I could sort of develop the case more explicitly, sometimes the insinuation, as does Khabeba Badarun, with the insinuation of those place names from other languages into her poem, other worlds pop up. But, connected up, advanced literary writing, no, because the infrastructures don't exist.
Thanks, Sishua. And the front here. There's a microphone.
Thank you very much. It really was very impressive. And actually my question is very closely related to the previous question. You say the infrastructure doesn't exist for literatures to grow in some languages, but in other languages it has. My work is on South African Sign Language, and there is a literature. And this is accessible. So I wondered then, but by implication, you have not had access, I suppose, to literatures in other languages from Africa or from other southern hemisphere countries, but it is there. And
Yes.
I would really like to encourage you to look at it.
Oh, absolutely, and I have looked at it. I've immersed myself in Khoikhoi, and I have learned Gamilaroi. In order to, and the learning of Gamilaroi was, which is a language still spoken by about 214 people in Western New South Wales in Australia. And one of the things that learning that language has taught me many, many things, and I'm very grateful to my absolutely extraordinary teacher, Tracy Cameron, who led me through the process of learning this very, very difficult language, is that I understood, I gained access to a completely different way of conceiving of spatial temporal relations, with a where things are relative to other things, which was all about orientation. Yeah, but you wanted to, yeah.
This is so close to me because I also study South African Sign Language literature and poetry, and it is an access into a different world, which is not only southern but also the world of the deaf. And yeah, it is very rich.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. We had Louise next.
Thank you so much, Elleke.
Thank you for coming.
This is a more conceptual question, and I think it might relate to some of the previous questions. The South is such an abstract concept, isn't it? And there seems almost to be a tension between the experiential, the kind of materiality of southern spaces, and this very abstract idea of the South, which you are almost calling into being. So that was my one question. I'm interested in that tension that emerges in your presentation. And the other one is something you just mentioned now, which is about the question of time and scales of time. Because it almost seems like the South is associated with, like, not the kinds of histories of the North, but these sort of vast geological times. And I'm interested in that as well. Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, thanks for the question, Louise. Yeah, it is this work, and it will continue. I think, I mean, I've drunk the Kool-Aid. I mean, it's going to go on. You know, it doesn't kind of come to an end, and I just kind of neatly move on to the next project. But that tension between the material and the kind of more abstract, and also these vast scales of time that I'm working with. It's a sort of geological time. It's something that I've wanted to maintain. I haven't wanted to lose the sense of that tension, sometimes almost an antagonism, even a kind of contradiction at the very heart of this project. So, yeah, I mean, the one kind of explicates the other. But it was with a terrible sense of unmooring and unfixing that about 2 years into my reading for this project, it was during COVID, I realized that none of these books of theory that I had relied on up to that point were going to help me to get to this abstraction that I was trying to put my finger on. It's really quite difficult. I mean, there is something very experiential about it, which is perhaps the material that the material aspect that you're talking about, because you do need to sink into, hence the emphasis on immersion. You do need to kind of sink into the media that are going to kind of get you there. There's nothing that is kind of that theorizable about it. So I did find, and this is evident, I'm sure, in the talk, you know, what I did find of incredible help was immersing myself in astronomy, immersing myself in geology, and you know, kind of the correspondence between geologists and climatologists, actually, because the climates of all the Antarctica-facing lands are determined by Antarctica, by the Southern Ocean and Antarctica. So, you know, there's a wonderful correspondence between climatologists in Pretoria, in Adelaide, and in South America in the 1940s, while the World War II is raging, about the links between the climates of the south-facing lands. So that's an inadequate answer to your question. It's a work in progress.
Thank you. So you have the story of a beautiful myth at the front of the lectern there. And Rumil Dave, who's a STIAS Fellow last year, he's a cosmologist. He started his lecture with that myth. Maybe you wanted to say something about that.
So how many of you know the story of the girl that made the Milky Way? Put your hands up high. Your here-ness will become evident. Okay. So this is a story to counterpoint, I'll go all the way back. This is a story to counterpoint the, that one. It comes from, so there were two remarkable ethnographers, Wilhelm Bleek and Lucy Lloyd, who worked in Cape Town at the end of the 19th century and recorded the Khoikhoi language of the Northern Cape people who were imprisoned. There were had thieves who had been stealing sheep because they didn't have access to other sources of food. They worked with the prisoners in the Breakwater prison, now a hotel, and recorded their language, which is why we can now study Khoikhoi to an extent, Xhosa, for example. They wrote down the language, and they also wrote down some of the stories. And Cabo, who was one of I like to think of him almost as a kind of Homer of Southern Africa. He told this remarkable story that has now been recycled and has appeared, by my count, at least 5 times in recent South African writing. The most recent example is Mirage by David Viviers. So this is the story of how the Milky Way came into being. A young woman was angry with her lover. He'd walked off to go hunting, and she wanted him to stay with her. I mean, there are different versions of the story, of course. This is my version, the one I can remember right now. And he walked off, and she was angry with him, and so she threw the glowing ashes of the fire that they'd been sitting at and eating food, she threw them into the sky in an act of revenge. So she wasn't going to cook the food anymore. She wasn't going to warm him. So that's how the Milky Way came into being.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Elleke. Thank you for those questions and comments from the audience. A word of thanks to Megan for that very invigorating introduction to Elleke. And Elleke, finally to you, thank you very much for agreeing to give this lecture on this remarkable work that you're doing. Good luck, and we look forward to walking it with you. Thank you.